few years ago, I was driving home late one rainy night on the same road I drove every day. The rain pounded against my windshield, joined by the occasional strike of thunder. As I made my way down the familiar road, thinking about how soaked I was going to be once I parked and had to run inside, I did a double take, seeing a young woman walking down the side of the road. I've never been one to pick up hitchhikers, but this situation seemed dangerous. I pulled up beside her, rolled my window down and asked if she was okay and if she needed a ride. The woman turned to look at me, her dark hair sticking to her pale face, and I couldn't help but notice she was shaking a little. "That'd be great, thank you," she said weakly, opening the door and climbing in. I rummaged around and found an old sweater of mine in the back seat, handing it to her in an attempt to dry herself off before I asked, "Where you heading? I'll drop you off." She did her best to dry herself off with the sweater, but it didn't seem to help much. Her hair was still so wet it stuck to her. "I'm trying to get home. I live a few minutes down the road," she responded in a voice just above a whisper. I pulled back onto the road, turning the heat up in a further attempt to aid this poor woman who looked like she had been walking in this rain for hours. Now, I'm not much for small talk, and she didn't seem to be interested in speaking much anyway. We drove in relative silence, aside from me asking her for directions. All the while, I couldn't help but notice the paleness of her skin. Not that she was fair-skinned, but pale. So pale. As we turned down the road she said led to her home, I asked if she felt okay aside from being wet and cold, worried about this woman's health. "Yes," she said calmly. "I just really want to get home." With that response, she pointed to a driveway up ahead. I put my blinker on, turning into the driveway, only to slam on the brakes. There was a set of large stones blocking access to the driveway, and behind them stood a dilapidated, obviously very abandoned house. Confused, I looked over to the young woman to ask if this was the right place, but she was gone. She didn't get out of the car. I would have heard the door open, at the very least hear the chime. She just vanished, leaving my sweater laying on the seat. I slowly reached over to grab the sweater, only to find it was bone dry. Since that night, if I ever find myself working late, I take another way home. Tapes of Trepidation presents the Campfire Sessions. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to the Campfire Sessions, here on Tapes of Trepidation. Well, this is it. The final edition of the Campfire Sessions for 2026. It's bittersweet, but we've had fun, haven't we? I always have a blast with these, and it's a nice little break from the norm. And I can't think of a better way to end off the sessions this year than with sharing more terrifying urban legends. Starting off with our cold open for this episode, a retelling of the classic urban legend, The Vanishing Hitchhiker. Written by me, TJ Hodder. Our next story, written by LeCremeDeMerde, which is a fantastic name, by the way, and guest narrated by friend of the show, Neal Skorupa, is the story of a strange situation that happened at a local campsite when two odd men came out of the woods one night, which quickly became a camp legend.
Some time ago, I worked as a camp counselor in northern Wisconsin. For those who don't know, Wisconsin is an interesting place that contains a few large cities that have much farmland between them. But the population becomes more sparse in the Northwoods. It's filled with small towns, most having populations barely exceeding 1,000. Since there isn't much to do, most people tend to drink a lot. We sure have a reputation. Apart from drinking and watching football, the outdoors is where most people spend their time. There are many patches of pristine land, barely developed, and make for great campgrounds. The isolation and quiet can be very relaxing and let us get away from the big city life. It can also be quite unsettling from time to time. Being alone, miles away from anything resembling civilization. We once had a fire in the camp, and the staff had managed to extinguish it before the fire department could even arrive at the entrance. That should give a sense of just how far we were from the nearest town. I was employed at the Boy Scouts of America at a camp in the Northwoods. The camp opened in the 1960s and was full of its stories, myths, and legends. I've heard nearly all of them. Most are quite amusing. Pranks played on the nearby camp, the follies of inexperienced campers, which adult leaders were assholes, and of course, the legend of the Hodag. The Hodag was a mythical creature concocted by Eugene Shepard as a hoax in Rhinelander, Wisconsin during the 1890s. Our camp only operated during the summer months, where troops would come up Sunday morning and leave Saturday morning. After all the troops had left, the staff would be given downtime when most shenanigans would occur, typically drinking at the bar, screwing around the camp. However, it was not uncommon for adult leaders to either come up a day early or stay behind for another day to enjoy the camp free of kids. Who can blame them? This is mainly when we could enjoy our few hours of freedom before we'd have to consistently work for another week. One week during the 1970s, a few adults had come up on Saturday to enjoy a few beers and quiet before the remainder of the troop would arrive the following day. They had shown up in the late afternoon when the staff was out of town. They just figured when someone arrived, they'd see them or be seen, and they'd tell them that they were there. The site was on the other end of an open field from a lodge, which we called the admin building. The staff was aware that they were coming, so there was no major concern. After setting up their site and settling around a campfire, a noise came from the woods behind their tents. When the leaders had looked, two men, each in matching white jumpsuits, emerged from the tree line. They looked like they were in their early to mid-20s, not an unusual age for a camp staffer. A look of surprise on the adults' faces soon went away as they had heard of the camp's mischievous behavior and brushed it off as some kind of prank on the younger staff. Soon the awkwardness was broken when one of the leaders let them know that they'd been waiting for someone on the staff to show up. One of them told them they were the only ones at camp and not in charge, but would inform the boss when he got back. The other had a look of concern, but then thanked the adults, reminded them not to litter, and to have a good time. After their brief conversation, the two men walked up towards the lodge and were not seen for the rest of the evening. For the remainder of the night, some of the leaders had said they had feelings of unease. Due to the silence of the woods, any sound is amplified. A noise, such as a deer walking, sounds much louder and can make one's imagination go wild. Just picture your reaction if you heard a twig snap. Still, they thought of how strange their encounter earlier had been. but they just assured themselves that it was just a prank by someone who was unaware of the leader's plans. The following day, one of the adults had gone up to the lodge to talk to the camp director. Some staff had gotten back late at night while the adults were sleeping. This had accounted for some noise. Seeing as some of them were drunk, when he found the director in his office, the director was pleased to see him and told him that he had seen the tents but didn't want to disturb the leaders. He then said that the entire staff had gone to the movies and a festival in a nearby town. The leader looked at him with shock and explained the events of the previous day. The director, now confused, informed him that no one on staff fit that description. Then he handed over a newspaper from the previous day to the leader. On the front page, there was an article about an escape from a local mental health hospital. The picture was of the men who had escaped. Both were wearing matching white jumpsuits. It's been roughly 30 to 40 years since this took place, and the camp had never seen an incident regarding these men. Few people had brought it up during the time I'd spent there. I never really worried about any of it. Part of me thinks it's just a story meant to freak out the younger staff. Part of me thinks it could be true. But regardless, the one thing I'd always wondered was, where did they go?
Our final story for this evening, and for the Campfire Sessions this year, written by DangerousDannyT, is a story that takes place at the now infamous Axe Murder Hollow. Susan and Ned were driving home through a wooded, empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the sky went dark in the torrential downpour. "We'd better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake, and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm gonna see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw his blurry figure in the headlight, walking around the front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet. "The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel deep in mud," he said. "I'm going to have to go for help." Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Although Ned hadn't said the name aloud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the car. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of road. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down into her seat, and she sat in silence for a while. And then she noticed another sound. Bump, bump, bump. It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it Hanging by his feet from the tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Bump, bump, bump. Susan screamed and ran toward the voice and the light. As she drew closer, she realized the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was the glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car. Playing around when my back was turned, the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of the axe with his fingers. You've been very naughty. The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in the eerie, incandescent light. This has been Campfire Sessions 8, Urban Legends Volume 2, by the Tapes of Trepidation Horror Narration Podcast. Our first story and cold open for this evening was a retelling of The Vanishing Hitchhiker by me, TJ Hodder, which in fairness was inspired heavily by the first version I was told when I was a kid, with some very creative changes. Our second story this evening was a camp legend written by LeCremeDeMerde, which I can't say without making a silly voice and is still a fantastic name, with guest narration by friend of the show and day one supporter, Neal Skorupa. You can find contact information for Neal in the show notes. And our final story this evening was a story based on the infamous legend of Axe Murder Hollow, written by DangerousDannyT. The Tapes of Trepidation theme, including the acoustic version you're currently hearing, was written and performed by JM Scherf. The Tapes of Trepidation logo, including the Campfire Sessions overlay, was created by Jason Rees from Jaybird Digital Arts. If you enjoyed what you heard here tonight, check out the rest of what Tapes of Trepidation has to offer. Now that the Campfire Sessions have officially come to a close with this episode, we're getting back to what we do best, with unique music and sound design for almost all of our stories. If you enjoyed this episode of the Campfire Sessions, I'm certain you'll love what else we have to offer. Support the show by subscribing and leaving a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, your favorite podcatcher, or like and subscribe on YouTube. And be sure to tell your friends. Word of mouth is extremely helpful to an indie podcast like this one. And check us out on social media through the link tree in the show notes. We have Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Discord. And if you'd like to support the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon. With as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to monthly bonus short story / micropasta narrations, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive, and more. So come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Doozer Pindan, Ronan Komori, Patrick Stewart, Madam Strangeways, Tori, Kai Faden, and JT Johnson. Thank you all so much for the support. I couldn't do this without my patrons. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available under Creative Commons Share-alike license. All rights reserved, unless otherwise stated. Licensing information can be found in the show notes. This podcast and its content may not be redistributed or rebroadcast without the express written consent of Tapes of Trepidation and the story's author. Thank you so much for listening. And now, my friend, it's time for us to get back to normal. I've had a wonderful time hanging out with you by the campfire with all of our friends as we shared these creepy stories. The Campfire Sessions are a fun escape for me during the summer months. But I'm excited to get back to business as usual here on the podcast, bringing you the best in trepidatious audio. You go ahead. I'll stay behind and put out the fire and pack things up. Just watch yourself heading back, because you never know what may be lurking nearby in the dark. Especially once the campfire goes out.